Hello and welcome back to part 2 of my Porsche 911 Carrera engine debacle. Last week I removed the engine and transmission out of this 87 Cabriolet. The symptoms when driving the car was a bad misfire, especially noticeable at low speeds. I knew when I bought the car it had a dead cylinder, so today we're going to pull off the offending cylinder head, find out exactly what's wrong. It could be, a cracked head, it could be a broken head stud, it could be a bent valve, it could be a bad valve guide, it could be all kinds of things. So let's see what it is. So now it's at a good height, I can start working on it. We'll pull the valve covers for the first time and see if we can see anything in there. The engine stand is a little bit precarious. I do have these like makeshift training legs sort of things to keep it from tipping over. It's pretty stable, but you definitely have to be careful. These intake bolts are a bit loose. They should be much tighter than that, but that's not why we have a bad leak. But that could be a source for some problems. Car ran pretty well except for the big misfire on number 5. These are M8 bolts, so they should be like at least 19 foot-pounds. These washers are special washers. They're extra thick. So if I can get them off now, great. If not, we need to make sure we don't lose any. There's 3 right there. Just got the fuel injector harness. These are the intake valves. No major obvious signs there. The back of the intake valves all look pretty clean. This particular one's open. This is the number 5. This is the one that we're having trouble with. And this valve has clearance at the moment. And this side's more of the same. The back of the intake valves look pretty clean. Look really nice. Even though these intake bolts were kind of loose, I don't see any signs of blow-by or marks on this. Sometimes on an intake you can't see where the air is coming through, but this gasket looks like it's fine. And looking at these head studs, these are all intact. This is a common failure point on these engines. The head studs break and those barrel nuts and the broken stud will just be laying there falling out. So this is the exhaust side. All of them are in good shape. I haven't checked the torque yet, but I assume they're fine. This is the intake side. Every head has 4 studs or 4 nuts. None of those are broken. Okay, this exhaust has been off pretty recently, so this shouldn't be too hard to remove. So now we got the engine stripped down mostly to the nitty-gritty, almost the long block. So I'm going to go ahead and pressurize cylinder 5, and now we should be able to definitely hear where the air is escaping. I already removed the spark plug on this one. That's tight enough. I've also turned the engine so that number 5 is at top dead center. It goes 1, 6, 2, 4, 3, 5, and this mark is lined up with the notch in the pulley there. And here's the problem. We got 80 coming in and only like 12 coming out. Like I said, I already checked. The valves do have clearance, so it's not a valve adjustment issue. See how it rocks back and forth? There's clearance, and I don't hear it coming from the intake. I think it's coming from either the rings or it's coming from the exhaust. Let's go listen to the exhaust. Yeah, there's a massive exhaust valve leak. There should be no air coming out right now, and it's just pouring out. The other place to listen is right here. This is the crankcase breather. So I can hear a little bit from here, but not much. So this tells you if the rings are leaking. Not much coming from there. It's almost all coming out the exhaust valve. This is why I highly recommend a pre-purchase inspection before you buy a car. That car looked pretty nice and the seller was not aware that it had a dead cylinder. But when you find stuff like that, it's kind of an expensive endeavor to go through and like tear out the heads and rebuild them. So that looks like what we're after. This exhaust has been off recently, so normally these are a bear to take off, but because this was done pretty recently, it's coming off super easy. I did a video on the red car taking the exhaust off, and I had to buy oxyacetylene torch to get it off. I'll put a link to that video right here. So there's the exhaust valve that is the problem, and you can't tell from here. It looks like it's fine. This one has a little bit of flaky deposits on the back, but all these valves look pretty decent. Also, the camshaft lobes look decent too. I've hooked the air up to the cylinder 5 again, and you can just hear all the air coming right out of there. It's either like a cracked head or a bent valve or a bad valve seat, because that's a lot of air. Also note these tubes here, oil return tubes, are the collapsible style. So if you ever develop a leak here, this style with the O-ring allows you to compress them and install them while the engine is assembled. That's like without taking the heads off. So we'll probably, now that we're taking the heads off, replace these with the solid tubes. A little bit less chance of leaking. Oh, those are always hard to get off. Okay, I think that's as much as we can do here on the bottom. As I said, the heads have to come off, but I'm using my scope camera to just take a quick peek at the piston and the cylinder. We're gonna see it eventually, but I thought I would kind of highlight this tool if you're inspecting an engine or you're doing a pre-purchase inspection. This tool can come in handy. I don't see any marks on the piston where like the valve might have hit it. So, and the valves and the pistons don't look that dirty. The camera is, smaller than your pinkies. Now we're down to what's called the long block, or basically the stripped down engine. But now I'm going to start bagging all the hardware for this side, 4, 5, 6, and making sure we don't lose track of locations of the rocker arms and the camshaft and the heads. We're going to make sure everything can go back exactly the way it was before with the same hardware. And these are all the takeoff components. I will be going through these and refurbishing most of them, not all of them, but I'll do some work on the engine tins and the plated parts and some new hoses and stuff. So now getting into the internals of the engine, this is the overhead cam with timing chain and Carrera oil-fed tensioner. So oil gets piped into here where that's the line that I took off. It pressurizes this cylinder and forces tension onto the chain. So right now it's pretty loose, but there's no oil pressure on it. See how it's moving the plunger? And because there's still tension on this oil plunger, it's got a spring inside too. So we need to compress it so we can release some tension on it. Once the tension's gone, we should be able to just slide it off this pin. And then the chain will be completely loose. But we got to get the chain loose so we can take the sprockets off. And if you're a pro, you use professional tools. If you're me, you just use woodworking tools. That might work right there. And every few seconds you just give it a pump, boom. See, the oil is coming out of the plunger there. So it's just a slow process of letting that bleed out a little bit, and then eventually we can stick a pin in there and it'll hold it down for me. This is a plastic foot on there too, so really not damaging anything here. We're just taking our time getting that oil out. Yep, I think that's all the way in. So let's release it and see what happens. Yeah, so now this pin is holding it. In fact, you can almost use the pin to pull this off, because it slides right off. So there's a little bit of black stuff here in the oil, a little bit of sludge down there, but it's not metallic or gritty or anything. It's basically just oil here, that old oil that collects down there. A lot of that kind of brown sludgy stuff kind of wipes off, so probably regular oil changes at least. So the back side of this idler gear, the teeth look normal. There's no wear there on the sides. But on this side, it's where it's shiny. And that's likely what this metal down here is, or that dark brown stuff. It's likely the material from this tooth just kind of getting worn. It's not chewed up. It basically just is shiny there. So it's starting to wear. This one is looking normal. No major, you can't feel anything with your fingernails. This one, you can barely feel a little step right there where it's just starting to wear. So it might be time to replace this idler gear. Although oftentimes they wear together with the chain, so I'll have to think about that. This tool is for setup purposes. So this is a mechanical tensioner by Stomsky Racing. And basically, because we want some tension on the chain when we check the cam timing. And it's not important that you check the cam timing before you disassemble it, because you got to redo it when you assemble it. But because I'm pretty new to these engines, I want to kind of get a feel for the setup and see what the timing is before I take it apart and see if it's within spec. This is kind of investigative work. It's not really the problem with this engine, but while we're here, we want to go ahead and determine as much as possible about this engine and make it as correct as possible. When this tensioner is operating, it's got a fair amount of pressure behind it. You know, the engines run at like 60 PSI. You know, 60 PSI would be at least 60 pounds of force here. It's gonna be a little hard to see, but this is like a scrap aluminum block that I adjusted or modified to hold this dial indicator. It's all very sturdy, and the pointer of the dial indicator is pointing on the top of the valve retainer. It's hard to see it in there, but I'll try to show you what's happening. So the valve is opening now, and we want to make sure we zero the gauge when the valve is closed. And remove these temporarily. We don't want these to get chewed up. So watch this number, it's zeroed out now correctly. As I turn the engine, it should start to creep up as the intake valve opens. So I'm just gonna creep up on the, it's called Z1 mark. Right where the square is, actually it's right about there. That would be the mark. So I can move this probably another notch width to get it to Z1. Yeah, it's 1.07 when this is at Z1. So that's really close to the spec. The ideal is 1.25, but this engine is, you know, hasn't been adjusted in a while, so it's 1.06 or 07. It should be 1.1 at a minimum. So that's good to know. Probably some wear in the timing chain. This kind of stuff can fall in your engine and do more damage than it saves. You know, the gaskets on these engines have all this surface area to create a seal. So typically you don't use the sealant on the valve cover gaskets, and never this much. This is just asking for trouble. I just want to show the position of these rocker shafts are not correct. So they're supposed to be sort of flush with the thin side. This is sticking out probably a millimeter, maybe a millimeter and a half. This one's probably half a millimeter. This one's again 1.5 millimeters or something like that. It's really supposed to be flush or almost flush. So likely what happened is some oil is coming out this side because it's not sealing correctly. Definitely looks like this side was leaking. So I need to customize my wrench to be able to fit in here. So I am going to cut it shorter. Now I know you guys are looking at this bench grinder right next to the engine, but I am not going to create grinding dust with the engine open. So I'm going to take this outside. This is a new cutoff tool that I got. It's perfect for outside because it's cordless, and it's got a real thin blade on it. And it's a cool tool. I'm just going to, you know, zip through here. This has like a rotatable head, so you can work in different positions. Like if you want the thumb to be there, I'll probably do that. And then you can also kind of rotate this guard. It's got several detents on it. So just like a lot of tools, you know, it's got a charge indicator and stuff. So I like it a lot. This one has been my favorite. This is what I would typically use, but you don't have that right angle. And this one actually has more power than the air tool has. But this one's pretty compact for tight spaces, but this is great for out here. Spark-proof goggles too. It has a soft start and soft slowdown feature, which is kind of nice. It doesn't just torque out of your hands, but you can't just, you know, rev it like that. It takes a while to spin up, but it is really safe. I like that. I'll put a link to this little guy in the description. Comes with 2 batteries. Can't go wrong. And this is where we really need to keep track of where the parts are. This surface looks pretty nice. There's no wear lines or anything on it. Nice and shiny. That's good. Has some wear marks on it. Let me wipe it off. This is the fresh side here. And this side has some shiny marks on it, but nothing you can really feel. But this one, I'll have to look a little bit more carefully with my glasses on, but this one may need to be replaced. Also notice how there's no seals in there. There's usually some seals that go in this groove. This one, they're missing. This bag is double marked, one on the outside, one on the inside, and these have to stay together. This is number 6 intake. This surface also looks nice. This surface also good. Real similar wear characteristics on this guy. A couple shiny spots, and once again missing the O-rings. Same thing on the exhaust rockers. They are sticking proud of the bore. They shouldn't be out that far. So when you tighten that, it actually mushrooms the end out and squeezes it into the bore. That's how they work. So if you're pushing on this and it's not coming out, you could be expanding it as you're tapping it. So if it's tough to get out, just take the hardware out and use a socket or something and push on just the shoulder on the inside there. That could make it come out a little easier. This one might be hard to get out, so it's a good practice to take the hardware out. It just depends how much they move. A 9mm socket will fit pretty nicely inside that counter bore. So if you're gonna have to push on it hard, you want to push on this inner surface, not the conical surface. All the rockers are now removed, and I got lucky. I didn't have to take off this cam cover. There is a gasket behind there that's not, I don't think, leaking. So if I can avoid taking this off, that's better. I don't need to have this off to remove the heads. I ended up kind of making a little makeshift puller with basically just a regular bolt with a large fender washer, and I had a nut that went down inside the counter bore of the rocker shaft. And as I tightened that nut on the end, it just kind of pulled it out, and then I was able to pry it from the end. So now that the rockers are removed, we can now come over here and take the camshaft out. Once the camshaft's out, we should be able to take the whole tower off and get access to the heads. This is a Porsche factory tool, and it just has these 3 pegs in it that correspond with the holes. So this will go over that big washer, index onto those holes, and then we just use, I have a heavy socket here with some tape on it, and we should be able to just untorque that bolt for the cam. There we go. Now when I pull this apart, I'll take the tension off of the idler there. That chain is likely going to fall down inside the engine. So we kind of want to either turn the engine to the side or wire that up a little bit so that doesn't lose its engagement to the sprocket inside the engine there. Now I've marked the orientation of this pin. This is what's used to adjust the cam timing. I've marked that with respect to the cam. So the timing wasn't great on this engine, but it's nice to know what it was before. We'll readjust it to be within spec. That came off nice and easy. This pin, you don't want to lose that pin either. So I'm going to zip tie these together just like that. Now it's important that we don't turn the engine anymore. So I'm going to take this wrench off. Once these are tied together, we cannot move the engine because it's still engaged with the sprocket inside there. And here's a Woodruff key. There are some shims here too. These need to be accounted for. This is what aligns to the sprocket. So we will keep these together, and there are 3 of them. The cam turns nice and easy in the tower, which you would expect from a running engine. Just going to thread a slightly longer bolt in there and protect that cam tower. We'll pull on it a little bit. Nope, it's glued on there pretty well. Ta-da! That puller just sucked it right out. No damage to the cover. It's a bunch of nuts and bolts that hold that sucker on. Now, I don't think this is just gonna slide off, so we'll have to turn the motor and sort of tap it a little bit, break it loose. So I have one nut holding it so it doesn't hit the floor, but this broke loose pretty easy. I'm gonna tap from the bottom. Ta-da! Okay, I said there was some sealant on here. This engine has very little. That's probably why it broke loose so easily. Normally you can see evidence of sealant there. And hopefully the studs don't break when we pull the heads off. Before I loosen these, I am going to tighten them to a specific torque and make sure none of them are loose. So my torque wrench is set to 21. And if any of these turn, then we know they are loose. That one's not loose. Nope. Okay, none of these heads are loose. And if the heads were loose, that would cause a leak, but that's not the problem. And we didn't detect a leak there with the leak down tester. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to break it free, and we'll kind of monitor at what torque it breaks free, just so we know. That was 50 foot-pounds and did not break free. So these are either over-torqued or stuck on. Yeah, these are all very, very tight. Yikes. we don't want to hurry this stage. We definitely don't want to break the head studs. I'm gonna let this soak probably overnight, and then I may end up heating the barrel nuts a little bit and just trying to get those free. It's possible somebody put Loctite on there, which, you know, just makes it harder on me. And that's a good night. It's been sitting overnight with the penetrating oil basically pooled up inside those barrel bolts. But I suspect it's also been Loctited. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I'm gonna treat it like it's Loctite because 50 foot-pounds in reverse torque should 100% take this off. So I'm afraid that it's gonna just break the studs. So I'm going to treat the Loctite with the torch. The only way to get red Loctite to release is to heat it to like 350, 400 degrees. And then I'm also gonna do another trick, which is beeswax into the threads. Try to displace the burnt Loctite and lubricate the release. So this hopefully will work. Like I said, I don't want to replace the head studs if I don't need to. $250. The reason why I'm heating all four is, you know, there's a lot of thermal expansion going on. So I want to try to balance it out as much as possible. The warm up and cool down cycles on these engines are pretty important. So I'm not trying to cause any damage here. I'm going to dab a little bit of the beeswax in there. It looks like the beeswax disappeared. Nope, that's right at 50 still. Won't come off. All right, I think I might have missed that on video, but I ended up with this breaker bar and it did come free and it made like a loud kind of crack sound. I'll try to capture this one on video. I'm just gonna move around the circle while it's still kind of warm. That torque wrench or breaker bar. And that's when it breaks free. So that's two loose. Oh, crazy how tight those are. And there we go, it's off. Now there's no signs of, you know, blow by or leakage here at this interface. And there's no signs of indentation there either. Here's what the cylinder looks like. And a piece of, you know, there's some debris down in there from the head when the head broke loose. But the cylinder walls look fantastic. A Nicocell or Alucell, something like that. So that coating is what Porsche uses to make these aluminum cylinders last a long time. And the coating seems to be holding up great. Like this surface right here looks like it's okay. No head gaskets on these engines. It's just metal to metal contact creates a seal. So I've put a spark plug in the head and I'm just gonna pour some water in there and see where it goes. Normally you'd use like some liquid solvent or something like that, but In this case, I think the leak is pretty dramatic, so I think we'll see where it goes. Trying to kind of see where the water is coming from, but it is coming out. You know, this should absolutely hold water, and it's coming out. I can see a little bit of pooling back there on the far side, so it'd be closer to the intake valve, and that's where the water's coming from. That is certainly the cause of the leak. Now we need to either determine what happened or learn how to fix it. The leak is occurring somewhere in the middle here. You know, I'll clean this head somewhat and make sure that the actual casting of the aluminum is not cracked. So I've adopted this tool. This is a valve spring compressor for Volkswagen heads, but I created this ramp and the stop to make it work with Porsche heads. And there's this block right here, which is pretty important. It goes in the head like this. And all that does is when you compress the spring, you don't want the valve to open. You just want to keep it locked. So that is going to go upside down on the ramp, just like so. Kind of line it up, push it down, grab a keeper. There's one. I'm just holding it with my hand pressure. And there's two. This is the valve spring retainer. This is a double spring system. This is the cup for the bottom. There we go, there's the valve. We look at the edge here and it's not shiny like it normally would be. It's kind of just black. Still has a little bit of water on it. I'm gonna pull these shims out before we lose them. So there's two. It's like 3, 4 shims, maybe more. 5 shims underneath the spring. That is the bare aluminum there. So here is the issue. So see how right here, the valve has got a lot of shiny parts to it. It's very shiny on that part of the seat. This part of the seat is not shiny. It's not making any contact at all. So you can see the moon there is not even all the way around. That's the problem. So the question becomes, why would the valve not be making its contact concentric? And the valve guide itself is worn. So see how much this moves? This up and down movement means the valve guide is completely worn out. That's a lot of movement. So I put this in my drill chuck just to see if it spins true. And it does appear to spin okay. So it doesn't appear to be bent. There's no signs of contact with the piston. So it's really just a worn valve guide. I'm going to pull this intake valve off too. I'm going to keep these parts organized together so I can put it back together, but this is going to need to be rebuilt. This valve has a shiny contact surface. This is how it should be. And then nice and shiny on the valve seat too. So it's making contact in all the places it should be contacting. And when I put the intake valve back in, this has no wiggle to it at all. It feels like it's the right clearance. I'm going to use these guys, small hole gauges. And what happens, this goes in the hole, you tighten the knob here and it spreads it open to where it makes contact with the bore. And I'm measuring the valve guide right in the area, kind of close to the chamber or the port. So you guys like it when I measure in millimeters, huh? The problem with me in millimeters is I'm going to get a clearance here and I'll write it down. And then I'm going to have to go look at the book to see if it's an appropriate amount of clearance or not. I know off the top of my head that it should be between 1 and 2 thousandths of an inch of valve clearance there, or the valve guide clearance, but we can look at the book and see. 9.191, 8.934, 8.935. That's 0.256 millimeters, which seems like a lot. So I will get my calculator and decide how much that is in inches, just so I have a feel. But this is clearly too much. So this is 10 thousandths of an inch, 0.01001. So I think that the valve clearance, I can look at the book, but I think the valve clearance should be 0.0018. So this is almost 10 times too big. I'm going to call it 9.052. I'm going to call it 8.943. So this is 0.111, which is much, much smaller than 0.256. So when I do that to inches, 0.0044 inches. So 0.11 and 0.256 millimeters. Let's look at the book and see what the wear limits are. So these numbers are in multiple places, but this is the Dempsey book, Wayne Dempsey. On the intake, 8.958 to 8.970, 96, and so we get 8.94. And then on the exhaust valve, it should be 8.938. This one is 8.934, so it's below the minimum. And then the clearance, valve guide clearances, the wear limit is 0.2. Which seems like a lot. That's on the exhaust valve, and I got 0.256, so beyond the wear limit. Clearly it's not functioning. The intake wear limit is 0.15, so it's below the limit, 0.11, but the design number is 0.04. 0.04, it's twice over the recommended clearance. I can take apart some of the other heads and see, but I don't have any reason why, one head would wear faster than the others. They're all probably about to get to the wear limit or beyond. So thank you all for watching me, take apart this engine and really get to the bottom of why it doesn't run well. And we figured it out all the way down to the individual part. It's the worn valve guide on number 5 exhaust is outside the wear limit. We were able to verify that. The other valve guides are probably on their way out as well. So I think my plan of action is to get all 6 heads rebuilt with the correct valve guides. So this car has about 110,000 miles on it, and somebody has rebuilt the heads before. So figure it probably went 80 or 90,000 on the factory valve guides, and then someone rebuilt it, and I don't know. I don't know what valve guide material they used, but apparently it's not the best. And Porsche's not really known for their valve guide material. It's, I think, not as good as the silicon bronze material that's used on other cars. So the machine shop that will do my heads will put in the best valve guide material that's available today. I don't want Porsche valve guides. I want the best valve guides. And a lot of you guys have been debating with me lately about, putting non-Porsche parts on my car. Well, Porsche made mistakes. They made mistakes on the valve guide material. They made mistakes on the head stud material. And unfortunately, they still sell the stuff. So it's buyer beware. You have to be open-minded to pick, what's going to work well. 20,000 miles on a rebuilt head is not good. So why did it wear out so quickly? It's not because the valve was bent. There's no indication that the valve hit the piston or anything like that. So most likely it's just inferior parts either from Porsche or from the aftermarket, and they're too soft. They can't sustain the wear.
If you have any comments on, or if you have similar experiences with Carrera valve guides, just leave your experiences in the comments below and we'll compare notes. I mean, that's kind of why we're doing this. We want to make sure we get sort of the best diagnosis and the best parts going forward and share with you guys how to put them in. I know my disassembly methods are a little different. I shared some tricks on how to remove some difficult hardware. My disassembly procedure does not follow that of the Dempsey book or even the workshop manual. A lot of the manuals just assume you're doing a full rebuild, and I didn't want to take off more than I needed to. I took the oil cooler off, but I didn't want to take the whole cam cover assembly off and lose the timing chain reference and all that. So yeah, a little different. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, like the video, you can subscribe. I really appreciate that. And it'll probably be a couple weeks before I get the heads back, but I'll have the parts all cleaned up and ready to reassemble by the time the heads get back. So hopefully I'll have another video next week. I'm not sure what it'll be, but Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays, Happy 356th day of the year, happy all the stuff. Hope you're enjoying some time with your family, and we will see you next week. Cheers.